A Bloodbath in the Border Princes, Part 2, Before the Storm. A stranger in a strange land. Thorgrim Frostbark shouted a curse at a man and his donkey as they slowly walked past him on the street. A part of him wanted to manhandle the beast out of the way, but a glance cast at the nearby guards told him this was a bad idea. Instead, muttering northern curses, Frostbark bit his tongue and waited for the stubborn mule to plod along. His bodyguards, armored in mail with helmets of a simple northern fashion, muttered to themselves about southern fools. Aye, the three of them stuck out sorely in the crowded marketplace of Brionne. Dressed in a simple, some would say crude, northern style, hair braided and beards combed, they looked almost comical in the Bretonnian port. Frostbark would have preferred to fight his way into the city, axe in hand, but his ship's poor state of repair after the storm, coupled with their days at sea, had weakened them all. Even Thorgrim still felt some of the sickness in him. No, he thought. He was brave, some would have said to a fault, but he wasn't stupid. When he had fled his father's court, cursing his brother and his scheming, he had done so with the intent of finding wealth, power, anything to help him reclaim what had been stolen from him. But this had proven elusive. He thought back to a few days ago. He was unused to raiding this far south, and a storm had blown them further afield. Eric Bloodaxe, one of the older members of his crew, and, ironically, one of the more peaceable, had suggested that they could rather make money as mercenaries. My Thane, the southern lords have always a need of strong arms. We don't have the means to take their gold, but perhaps we can convince them to give it to us willingly. I hear wisdom in your words, Bloodaxe, but how will we convince these Southlanders? Well, we are near the port of Brionne. A relative of mine, of the Bloodaxe clan, far removed. He stays here. Seek him out, and he can help us. So then, after bearing a flag of truce, the Norse were allowed into the city. The guards reasoned that a ship in such poor condition could hardly be used for a raiding party, and they were right. While his crew sought for provisions and tried to keep to themselves, Frostbark made inquiries about the location of the Bloodaxe merchant. He neared the house just as the sun was beginning to set. The house itself was by no means large, but it seemed sturdy and well kept. Without much ceremony, Frostbark knocked his meaty hand into the wooden door and demanded to be let in. At first he heard nothing, but after the fifth knock, movement could be heard at the door. To his surprise, it was a small boy who opened the door. The boy, hardly 14 summers old, had a crop of bright red hair and instantly shied away from the huge warriors before him. Careful now, Hubert, who... The words died in his lips as Robert saw the armored men at his door. Almost instinctually he made to shut the door, but Frostbark was quicker. Eric's Bloodaxe sent us. Are you so southern as to deny your hearth to the thane of your kin? He barely strained as he held the door open. With a gulp, the man realized the enormity of his words and slowly ushered them inside. Forgive me, my thane. They were all seated in Robert's small living room. The Northmen squished themselves into chairs built for much smaller men, while Robert's wife, Amelie, quietly and quickly served them some water. With a final glance, she gave Robert a worried look before hastily rushing the children and herself to the upper floor. When they left, Robert turned to his guests. So, my thane, the words felt strange to his more Bretonnian tongue and sensibilities. There has been much disruption in the north. I have come south with my warriors to seek a fortune to quiet it. I have no interest in claiming these lands, or, and he pointed with his finger, your wealth. At these words, Robert relaxed somewhat. What I need is employment as a hired sword. Tell me who I must seek out. Robert scratched his head. You will be hard-pressed around here, my thane. The lords, they fight on horses. Frostbark smacked his hand on the table. They can die on horses, too. Robert sensed the meaning of his words. There will be no work for you up here, my thane, but there are rumors further south. There are troubles brewing. I hear the merchants talk about it in the quarter. Troubles that I think would be perfect for a warrior such as yourself. At that, Frostbark smiled for the first time that day. The Dragon Prince. The morning sun, beat down as the collection of riders moved up the hill. The sounds of battle echoed throughout the valley, and from this vantage point, the party of elves could get a better view. Long is the enmity between the elves of Ulthuan and their Drukai cousins. Today, that hatred war witnessed a terrible deeds, as two armies clashed in a desolate valley under the hot sun. Through a combination of sorcery and luck, the vanguard force of the High Elves had been able to catch their Dark Elven rearguard by surprise. To the shock of no one, the High Elves gave their hated foe no quarter and struck them down as they fled. Theirs was a long and bitter hatred indeed. Who can know what bitter fruit would be borne on the tree watered with the blood spilt that day? The prince, however, cast those thoughts from his mind, as he and his riders crested the hill. Calling them riders almost did them a disservice, for to the High Elves, the prince and his retinue were the fabled dragon princes of Calador. In mightier days, the prince might have gone to war on the back of a mighty and terrible dragon. Indeed, long had he wished to stir one of those ancient beasts from their slumber. Sadly, these were not mightier days, and the dragons increasingly chose to sleep, growing more restful and harder to rouse. So, the prince made do with a fine warhorse, though, to the lesser races, Sunspear would be a horse worthy of a king. If Sunspear was restless, he gave no sign of it, and he and his rider composed themselves in a perfect harmony. To some onlookers, the prince and his retinue might have looked like perfect statues, encased in gleaming ornate plate armor. Servant, my eyeglass. At the command, one of the servants who rode with the knights rushed forward to carry a strange tube of metal and brass to the prince. He took it without any fanfare and brought it to his eye. Using it, he could spy movements of the Dark Elf army that they had been pursuing. With the rearguard almost entirely routed, the prince had volunteered to scout further afield. Many had questioned the sense of such a high-born warrior doing such lowly work, but the prince had insisted. Besides, he rode with some of the finest riders to be found in the whole world. Little could pose a threat to them. From this vantage point he could spy remnants of Dark Elves fleeing the valley. Most had thrown down their arms to aid in their flight, but here and there isolated pockets of resistance would coalesce. There, the Illyrian reavers would dash and pepper them with arrows before their counterparts in swift chariots would ride them down. It would have been beautiful, a dazzling display of horsemanship and grace, if not for the mechanical nature of the killing. He was about to put the eyeglass away when he spied something that drew his attention. A cloud of dust began to form around a single unit as they advanced back into the valley from across the further field. Unlike the others who ran on foot, this one moved quickly and loudly. They were mounted. One of his retinue gasped as the cloud of dust gave way to reveal a unit of Cold One knights. Dark Elves were not known for their kindness, even to their own kind, and this move seemed much more of a tactical necessity than a gallant charge to the rescue. The Cold One knights were vicious beasts, the eponymous Cold Ones, who were rumored to be from the south of the world. The prince had, of course, heard the rumors of their taming, how a knight would have to bathe in toxic chemicals to mask his scent from the lizard-like beasts, and thus prevent them from turning on their rider. In addition to the foul smell, the process killed all the nerve endings of the rider, further marking out them from their kin. The beasts were frenetic in combat when controlled, although the riders with their barbed lances were as fierce. The riders were countercharging the reavers. The reavers, with their lighter horses, were no match for the charge of heavy lizard, and the prince watched in horror as elfin lizard tore into the light cavalry. "Attendant, send a hawk to Prince Elras. Riders found. Engaging. Make haste!" With nary a second word, another of the prince's attendants wrote a message and released his hawk to carry it back to the main elven camp. The other dragon knights knew what was coming. The prince called for his lance, and then his sword, and he bade his riders follow. Without a word, the riders did as they were told. Some of the best cavalry in the world, and now they were bearing down on the Cold Ones, who in their bloodlust had stopped to feast upon the corpses of their victims. The riders used whips and commands to bring them to attention, but not before the prince and his riders charged home. It was a titanic struggle. Knights from lineages of two different dragons fought each other in a vicious melee. The dragon knights were better trained, and their skill with the lance and blade was almost unmatched in the world. The Cold Ones, however, were a vicious beast, far stronger than even elven horses. The prince and his retinue fought for their lives in a swirling melee. Just as he had decapitated a foe, he heard the sound of Prince Elras. In that moment he turned, thinking the beast of the slain rider a lesser concern. That was his folly, and now enraged, the beast had leapt up and sank its fangs into the prince's thigh. Its sharp fangs pierced even his sturdy plate. Both lizard and elf fell to the floor in a desperate struggle. Though he would survive the battle, and the dragon knights would be resoundingly victorious, the prince had been forced, for his folly, to return home in shame. An old wound, a reminder of this campaign.